Good day and welcome to Ransford's weekly wraps. As usual, what we'll do is we'll cover three topics or stories occurred in the week and give you some ideas to what they're going to do in terms of your investments going forward. And as become tradition recently, we're going to be adding on a section A at the end where we cover some developments in that field. It's such a major field at the moment that I think we need to have that as a separate segment, quite frankly. So, three topics this week are going to be as follows. Firstly, some bad news from the South African consumer. Next, some developments in the Ukrainian-Russia war. And finally, some good news for the Rand. So, bad news for the consumer. We've seen a number of different companies come out recently showing that the South African consumer is under pressure. The most recent one has been African Bank, showing that, which came out with the results saying that they had more than a third of their customers basically having not paid for about 3 months or being 3 months behind. That's an incredible amount of people. It's a major impairment for the company. This follows on from results we got from places like Tiger Brand, showing that people are changing. Also, some of the food retailers like Shoprite and Pick n Pay, etc., showing that South Africans are not just under pressure; they actually are changing their food consumption. So, like using less condiments, less tomato sauce and so on, and more staples. Buying less chicken and maybe buying more bologna, that kind of stuff. It's obviously a major pressure point in the economy at the moment. Why I'm bringing this up right now is that if you look at where we are about a year away from the next election. The government is obviously aware of these particular factors, and so we might be seeing more and more pressure on the government to try and do something about them. What exactly they can do is going to be quite difficult to understand or to see in advance. Maybe something around the pensions side, or maybe something like we've seen in the European Union or in the US, where they have attacked the companies for greedflation. I think that's the term that's been used, where they accused companies of basically trying to be greedy, and that's why prices are going higher, not because of actual underlying fundamental causes. But anyway, that's going to be, I think, a major issue for the next year or so, at least until the election, because this kind of pressure on the consumer is going to result in difficulties, for the government. The next story is Russia-Ukraine and what's been happening there recently. Biggest recent development has been that a major dam in Russian-controlled territory was, destroyed. By whom? We don't know. Just understand that this dam is significant for a number of reasons. Firstly, it supplies water to the largest nuclear power station in Europe. Look, there's no danger of a meltdown just yet. Apparently, the supplies of water are good for a few months more at the power station. If they don't have some kind of plan to bring it back, we are probably have to see the power station shut down. But right now, there's no danger of another Chernobyl or something. The next thing is that it's going to flood huge areas of land. We're talking about a gigantic dam, and we're talking about huge amounts of land being flooded. People having to be rescued from the top of their houses because their houses have been flooded. Massive amounts of agricultural land out of whack as well, because there's no water that used to irrigate a lot of land. This water, and finally, it's also going to impact military decisions, because what's happened now is that this dam has basically burst and has flooded a whole bunch of land. One of the reasons that we have not seen much developments recently in the Ukraine-Russia war has been the fact that the ground is too muddy to do much. Ukraine has very muddy ground, and if you don't stay on the roads, you really can't travel around. The water basically has been drying up, and then the ground has been a bit firmer, and there was a hope that there'd be some kind of Ukrainian, at least or belief or expectation, would be some kind of Ukrainian counteroffensive in the next week or so, maybe like the next couple of weeks, against the Russians. Obviously, if the water is basically the problem and you've just flooded the area, that basically resets all those timelines. And so a lot of the area that might be being used for transport or for travel is basically effectively blocked off from a lot of the major troop and equipment movements that the Ukrainians might be wanting to do. So why would either party do this? Why would the Ukrainians do this? Well, the Ukrainians might have done this. Firstly, there was evidence that they were planning to do something like this a few months ago, when there was a Discord server that was released. Discord, a leak on like micro Discord. Some young kid that basically got out, released a whole bunch of classified information, and we saw stuff there that obviously the governments don't want you to see, but there's evidence that the Ukrainians were thinking of doing something like this here a while back. It doesn't just affect the Ukrainians; it also affects the Russian side. This was on the Russian side of the border, the fighting or whatever. It makes the Crimea region, which is like one of the first most major, areas of contention that occurred back in 2014, very vulnerable in terms of water. The Russian Black Sea Fleet is based out of that region, which makes it, again vulnerable because without this major supply of dam water, now we got to rely on ways to get water into the region, which might be more vulnerable to attacks. Why would the Russians have done it? Firstly, as I mentioned, it makes it more difficult for the Ukrainians to do a crossover, an attack. Also, it destroys a lot of Ukrainian farmland, and also it does affect that, like I said, electricity production, because the largest nuclear power station in Europe is, obviously going to be offline effectively if this water is not restored or some other alternate source is not found. Now, if you look at most commentators out there, they're saying it's almost certainly the Russians. I would remind you that that was the same tack taken when the Nord Stream pipeline burst, and now it's pretty clear that it was the Ukrainians. There's evidence from that, again, that Discord leak that it was the Ukrainians. There is a lot of backup data showing that the Americans knew about this, and there have been plans to do something like this here for a while. Just be taking every bit of news out of the region with a pinch of salt. What could be the impact of this? Firstly, it probably is going to have a big impact on agriculture. Like I said, we're talking about a gigantic amount of agricultural land for the Ukraine basically taken out of commission because they won't be able to irrigate that land because the dam's gone. So food situation is probably going to be still precarious for a couple of years from now. It's also going to be basically making it more difficult for the Ukrainians to get an upper hand and maybe have some kind of agreement being forced on the Russians, because it's going to be more difficult to actually attack at this point in time, with that being the hope. If they don't attack reasonably soon, we get to the next phase. We have winter coming through, and the next muddy season, and then another big delay in terms of when actual territorial developments in the area could be occurring. And then finally we come out to the rand, and that's in terms of our stories for the week. The rand broke through 19 rands to the dollar. This is a significant move considering just like last week or so we were at 19.91. This is almost a 5% move from there. We are seeing a situation where the amount of negative news around the rand around South Africa has kind of come down the last week or so. For those of you that don't remember, the reason that we saw the rand blow out to about 19 plus was because of the statement by the US ambassador that we were basically supplying armaments to the Russians. Now there's been evidence that the ANC has kind of rethought its position. There was a newspaper article quoting an ANC minister, Ms. Mullah, that says that basically the ANC might be open to rethinking its Russia position. There's evidence that we have talked to the Russians about not putting too much pressure on us, and even possibly moving the next meeting of the BRICS, maybe to China, something that gives us a little less pressure. So we don't have to deal with some of the stuff happening with the Russians coming to South Africa and possibly facing arrest by the Cape Town Municipal Police or something. That is a bit of a calming down in that situation from the South Africa side. But it wasn't the only bit of good news. I mean, we had load shedding, for instance, and the day now is gone. If you look at the trend line of availability of electricity, you find that around this time in winter, the availability of electricity increases, to a little peak, and then falls down thereafter. It must be noticed that the overall trend is still negative. So every year the peak is getting lower and lower, but the peak is still occurring, and that's kind of helping us out at the moment. So that's one good thing. We also saw a current account balances in South Africa not coming as badly as expected. It was pretty much the best we've seen in about a decade or so, driven higher by gold and other factors. So overall, we're seeing a bit of good news coming through, both in terms of political situation, in terms of the infrastructure load shedding situation, as well as in terms of the pure economic situation, in terms of how much we are selling versus how much we are buying. And what's good about this is that if you can get the rand to about, say, 18 or even 17, that takes a lot of pressure off the Reserve Bank. A 17 rand to the dollar or 18 rand to the dollar level is much better than 1990 to the dollar level or 20 to the dollar level. That's 10% cheaper at 18 versus 20. That means all the stuff we import, like for instance petrol and or petroleum and whatever, machinery and that kind of stuff, is basically 10% cheaper, which will have a negative effect on inflation. So that's the bit of good news here. So don't be surprised if you see the rand a bit stronger for the next few weeks or few months than it has been for a little while. And finally, we come up to AI Corner. We're going to have two topics this week. One is Apple and one is Nvidia. So with Apple. Apple had its Worldwide Developer Conference this week, WWDC I think it's called. And that is a kind of a where they announce like a lot of new stuff, where they get the really newest stuff out to developers. But Apple has a lot of apps on its platform, and it needs these developers need a lot of like lead time to get stuff done to work on the new platforms that they are basically producing. And one of the new platforms that they are going to be coming out with, the major new platform, is some goggles, like VR/AR goggles. You put them over your eye, you can be immersed in an AI world, or artificial reality world, or virtual reality world. From what I gather, from those who used it, obviously I have not been there myself and used them, but from what I gather from those who have used it, a couple of things to take away. Firstly, this is a high quality product that has been offered by any of these competitors. It's better. It just does things better. And the next thing is that the user interface that Apple is using is incredibly innovative and natural feeling. And that's one thing Apple tries to do. Apple tries to have a natural feeling user interface. And, like Steve Jobs always, I think he said, basically, if you have to teach people how to use it, it's not good enough. People just need to be able to use it naturally, okay, without a manual or whatever. So, and this kind of product apparently does that. It uses eye tracking and finger movements to basically, manipulate the space. And those that have used it say it's very natural. And after like a few minutes of using it, you just, don't think about it, quite frankly. So yeah, that is a very interesting point from that particular thing from Apple. The other thing that we have mentioned about this is the price. This is about $3,500. That's the price point put here. That's about 65,000 plus rands for a pair of goggles. Okay, if you want to replace, for instance, your TV, if you have more than one person in the family, everyone has to get their own set of goggles. This is not a shareable thing. So it's not really, I think, ready for mass market as yet. That being said, this is what Apple usually does. Sends out developers a year early. The developers basically, work on it, get apps, and then in a year's time when it launches, it has all this extra stuff, and plus it's going to be cheaper. Like I said, it's not available to the public yet. It's going to be launched next year. But like I also said, it seems that Apple has got another one of these winners where they've at least got the build quality and everything else about the experience, at really a top-notch level. It only remains to be seen whether or not they can convince consumers to basically get onto a new platform. And another thing about the Apple conference is that Apple didn't want to say the word AI much. They were far more willing to basically use the word machine learning, even though, in the context that they were using it, they were almost interchangeable. Why is this important? For a couple of reasons. Firstly, now Apple has had a history, like I mentioned before, of having a very great user interface, very great products, quality build, and so on, because they basically take a little more time to get this stuff out to the public. They wait for the technology to be ready instead of rushing things just to be first. What that has meant is that historically that they've had much more user-friendly products, even though the products in terms of pure paper comparison are not going to be apt to scratch in terms of like some of the things that Sony or Google are doing and so on. But the user experience is still better. The fact that they're using machine learning and not AI may indicate they're not trying to basically put AI as this front and center part of their offering. And make no mistake, the reason that they're using machine learning instead of AI is not some kind of random word choice. Apple has thought about this. There's probably people being paid a fortune to come up with reasons as why they're doing this, etc. But machine learning, as opposed to AI, I think makes Apple say, or kind of says for Apple, we are not going to be focusing on artificial intelligence until it's ready. We're not going to be bringing this out just to bring it out. We're only going to use it when it's needed. So, for instance, the goggles and the finger thing probably does use some form of artificial intelligence. There's evidence that they basically are using that also for their keyboards, for predictive text, etc. So yeah, Apple is trying to use artificial intelligence / machine learning to improve the experience of their customers, but they're not yet willing to come out and say that we are going to be an artificial intelligence company, like many of the other tech companies out there are trying to do at the moment. Okay, and speaking of artificial intelligence companies, I just want to give a little update on Nvidia. Nvidia is back down a little bit. It's not quite at $1 trillion in market capitalization at the moment. But I want to highlight a point about Nvidia. Nvidia has a new architecture called the Grace Hopper architecture. What they're trying to do is, I think they're trying to get almost a monopoly in the hardware for artificial intelligence space. Why did I say that? Well, the difference between what we are, what is offering right now, and the normal computer chips that we are used to, the stuff that you put in your PC, etc., is that you can put like an AMD or an Intel chip in your PC, but they both run the same programs. They both can use the same kind of software to work. When it comes to what Nvidia is doing right now, the great software architecture for training AI, etc., that doesn't have a transferable software layer. You couldn't take that software and basically charge it on some other company's machinery, because the architecture would be too different. And what this does mean is that Nvidia is making a play to be kind of almost the monopoly in the AI space. And if that is the case, then it might be a very cheap company. We have yet to see what Intel is going to be doing. We have to see what AMD is going to be doing. But they have to do something. They cannot just let Nvidia basically run away with the prize, because if they come up with something in a year or two, by that time, people's programming skills will focus on Nvidia. People's experience will be on Nvidia. And unless whatever the new competitor is dramatically cheaper or more capable, we're likely to see very little adoption of new standards once we have a couple of years established with Nvidia's technology. Okay, that's for this week. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to speaking to you guys again next week. Cheers.